Horror cinema relies on the brutalization and therefore trauma of its characters. With recent postmodern material, a long-standing debate has proved to have greater relevance today. Where is the line between fetishizing the trauma of female characters and gracefully portraying them? I will be analysing 3 films against this question, significantly Blonde, an intertextual Marilyn Monroe biopic, Midsummer, a political new age horror, and Jennifer's Body, a parodic comedy horror with a gradual rise to cult-like status. These 3 films provide variety in terms of their place across the horror spectrum, the political climate in which they were released, budget, and the male versus female creative influence. Blonde, whilst not marketed as a horror, provides the biggest bridge into this argument not only with its most recent release, but also because of the infantile and explicit treatment of Marilyn's character. By comparing these films by the characteristics of horror cinema and their treatment of female trauma, we can begin to answer this question. Blonde displays the violent trials of the protagonist Marilyn in a deeply cinematic way. With unseen entities and monsters in dark corners, it is in this way Blonde is similar to Midsummer, both being horrors with unnerving beauty. Midsummer uses its aesthetic lightness to play into the film's polarity of good and evil, where the danger is so unrecognizable to the characters that it exists undetected in broad daylight. The film uses our preconceived ideas of familiarity and otherness to play on our understanding of the innocent and the perverse. It does this so successfully that we feel a degree of catharsis for Danny at the end of the film, when really she has fallen into the arms of evil. Danny's trauma haunts her every decision, but there is a larger socio-political truth the film is playing to, the dichotomies of the perverse urban and the idealized pastoral. Jennifer's Body can be classified as camp with its playful and hyperbolic parodic style. However, the film speaks on many ideologies, such as the femme castratus character following a rape revenge narrative, whilst demonstrating the effects of post-feminist culture on film. Comedy and horror both rely on tempo build-up and payoff. This oxymoron presents Jennifer's Body as an unserious commentary on a serious topic. It presents us with the monstrous feminine, a rebuttal to phallic institutions. Our female protagonist will partake in masculine violence, determined to refuse victimhood. By isolating her, audiences identify with the camera eye and shudder in abominable fear. It is in this way that Blonde fails as a horror movie. With a scattered build-up and a disappointing payoff, at the end of the film we are left discouraged. After 3 hours of Marilyn being ravaged physically and spiritually by dominant male figures, she gives up with seemingly little resistance after being presented as something little more than human. Her Freudian quest for a father figure ultimately leads to her downfall, and what is the film supposed to make us feel? Though in her journal article Louise Kaplan speaks on Monroe's role in Misfits, her life was robbed of the diversity and vitality that allows an actress to grow into a believable womanly presence. The conclusion is an eerie reflection of the postmodern 2022 adaptation of her life. Kaplan also describes fetishism as a psychological strategy that displays with a suspicious urgency a narrow or part representation of the body's experience, in order to mark or repress a fuller experience that would otherwise constitute a trauma. She insinuates that a sexualization of a trauma is the removal of a trauma. Between symptomatic events and aesthetic pleasure, a strategy is created that paints a female character as a sexually available, traumatized shell. The male gaze, transforming her into a doll, worships her only as long as she is perfect. At the first sign of eccentricity, she ends up rejected, like a doll abandoned by children. Promoted as a raw retelling of the objectification the real-life Marilyn faced, the film itself does exactly this. The penultimate sequence of Marilyn stumbling naked, bloodied, and drugged throughout her house best exemplifies this. Either a snorcam or a handheld camera are widely utilized to create a personal atmosphere of panic, and it is in this way that Marilyn's animalistic state is captured. After watching Marilyn's misfortune after misfortune, Adrian Horton's essay detailing Martha's explicit miscarriage in Cornell Mundrusko's Pieces of a Woman summarized the portrayal clearly, defining a woman by the worst thing that has ever happened to her, spotlighting the traumatic event in eye-popping, absorptive detail, whilst leaving all pieces outside of it murky, out of view. This was solidified after witnessing Marilyn's multiple detailed unconsensual abortion scenes in Blonde. In Jennifer's Body, Jennifer's arc follows a rape revenge narrative, with her sexual trauma disguised as a satanic sacrifice. Diablo Cody, writers of Jennifer's Body, has always been very vocal on her intentions for the film, and continues to be decades after its release. She is keenly aware of how Jennifer has been received and uses the evolving feminist climate as a point of comparison, particularly after the Me Too movement. Jennifer's Body is a sexually charged film crafted intentionally so by Cody through her casting of Megan Fox, who was a prominent sex symbol in 2009. Using a monstrous feminine figure as its titular character, she uses her succubus-like sexuality to create fear in men. The self-aware femme castratus represents a man's most base fears, or what it is about women that is shocking, terrifying, horrific, abject. There is something horrific about Marilyn, Jennifer, and Danny, whether it is hysteria, violence, or revenge. Danny's traumatic arc in Midsummer does not fall into a sexualized context. In fact, the only sexual content in the film is completely negate of a sexualized gaze. Beginning with her family's murder-suicide, her trauma is the driving force of the plot. Danny struggles between two evils. It is through her emotional journey that we explore these evils and struggle to decipher which is worse. She is a fully formed person, desperately trying to grieve and navigate the obstacles that come her way. But there is an overlap between all of these films, a distinction of horror. The horror of Midsummer is driven by the objectified other's resistance to the imperial power's cartographic imperative that satisfies their desire to dominate place and own space. Jennifer's resistance turns to violence. Danny, an emotionally complex woman, struggles against these forces, whilst Marilyn simply does not resist the imperial powers she faces. Does our female character evolve beyond her trauma as a multifaceted person, or is she only an uncanny vessel, a strategy? Each of these films approach female trauma with varying levels of success, and the differing critical response is indicative of how each title is sympathetic to the topic. For example, Blonde, met with outrage from the box office, forced Marilyn to the same fate as when she was alive, exploitation.